Hi, this is Max Verstappen, and you're listening to Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM.
All right, welcome back. I have been promising this segment from Jonathan Green. Jonathan normally joins us, but he's out at Laguna Seca calling the Trans Am race with Willie T. Ribbs. But
that's got to be entertaining alone, those two.
Yeah. But Jonathan has been to this track so many times that I really, really wanted to get his take on this. We were going to try to sneak him in live, but it just wasn't going to work. But I'm really glad we didn't, because he recorded this for us, and I think it's a great, it captures the sentiment of why Imola is so historic and so important. So let's hear from Jonathan.
Hey guys, I wish I could be with you this weekend because the Imola race is one that I hold dear to my heart. It's a place I've been for both Formula One and World Supers over the years, and to say it's a classic is an understatement. I mean, this is a racetrack or a competition field that goes back 2,000 years, and I'm not joking. It was used in Roman times for chariot races and gladiatorial battles. That is how old the city of Imola is. And it really is built inside almost the city itself. The contours of the small river valley of the circuit which hems it is the Santerna River, which is the natural boundaries on one side, and on the other you've got the hillside which looks up. So it's a natural amphitheater, and you can understand why the Romans loved it so much. But for the Italians, it's even more special because Bologna, just down the road, is where Ducati is based, and it's where the famous 200 was held at Imola back in the 70s, which made Ducati so famous as a race team. And of course, in Formula One terms, it is the Autodromo di Dino e Enzo Ferrari, and of course that is named after Enzo's son Dino, who died. And of course, if there wasn't a Maranello, this would be Ferrari's home track. Now, with Ferrari leading the championship, you have to expect that the Italians will come out in their throngs to be part of this amazing classic race. It's got so much to offer. But I think you have to go there to understand it. When you'll see the pictures on TV, you'll see a fantastic track. But what you don't see is how close to this classic city you are. I mean, literally, there are houses at turn 4, just before turn 4 and 5, which is Tosa, as the cars go round to the left and then up the hill towards Piratella. There's a house right in the middle of there. I've seen the lady putting her washing out there in times gone by. And then you head down to Castigliago, which is the name, another classic name from the park, and then back uphill through Acqua Minerale, Varante Alta, Ravazza 1 and 2. Ravazza 1 and 2 is amazing. It has a high wall on the outside of it, which you can see if you look to the outside of turns 10 and 11. And there are apartment complexes right there, and I'm talking 20 yards away, with people peering out of the windows of those apartments looking down. So talk about being in a city. You couldn't get any closer. And likewise, it's got both a classic history, but a tragic history too, because of course, because of the natural surroundings of the city and because it is such a treasured part of the Bologna region, there was only so much that they could do with the track when it came to making it more safe as it got more modern. And of course, we'll all remember 1994, May 1st, and that weekend when Roland Ratzenberger and, of course, the great three-time world champion Ayrton Senna lost their lives. In fact, the day before, also, Rubens Barrichello crashed heavily at Varante Bassa. And the story goes that Ayrton Senna, a fellow Brazilian, of course, visited him in hospital. And Ayrton was troubled throughout the weekend about safety through Tamburello, which at the time was a flat-out corner, long before it became the chicanes that you now have. And the reason for that was when this accident happened, the Grand Prix went away for many years because of the tragedy, obviously, and there was a huge investigation into the Senna death. That is the way Italian law works. They investigate it until they decide who is at fault for the accident and who is in fault for a death at a circuit. So there was a lot of controversy, and it looked as though Formula One would never come back. But they came up with a plan to change Tamburello. The problem being that you couldn't just increase the runoff where Senna went off. And by the way, Senna wasn't the first. There were so many other drivers that went off on that corner. In 1987, Nelson Piquet, another three-time world champion, during practice had a tyre failure at Tamburello and missed the race due to injury. In 1989, at San Marino Grand Prix, Gerhard Berger, the Austrian, crashed his Ferrari at Tamburello after a front wing failure. The car caught fire and had heavy impact, and thanks to quick work of the firefighters and medical personnel, Berger survived, but had burnt hands going into the 1989 Monaco Grand Prix. Michele Alboreto, another Italian, also had an accident in Tamburello while testing his footwork arrows at the circuit in 91, and Riccardo Patrese also had an accident at Tamburello in 1992. But of course, obviously, everybody remembers Roland Ratzenberger, Ruben Barrichello, and Ayrton Senna in 1994, which was probably the most tragic in the history of Formula One. But the race and the Grand Prix and the track itself have remained, and it remains without doubt one that absolutely instills the passion of motor racing. And even though the confines of the circuit itself make it a very hard weekend for both the teams and the fans, because you're cramped at every which way. It's great for the fans because you can be up on the hillside and you can be looking over. Fans who can't get a ticket sometimes clamber the walls or get under the fences. It's one of those kind of races. But for the teams themselves, there's so little room. I mentioned the river. Well, you can't move a river, so the paddock itself is tiny. Everybody's packed like sardines into the little paddock. It's got better over the years, but it really is one of those places that, hey, you put up with it. Because the advantages are you could walk across the bridge after the race and go straight into a fantastic restaurant. Or in fact, there's one right at Ravazza 2 as you leave the circuit, a beautiful Italian restaurant. So these are the sorts of things. And then you wander into the city, of course, and I mean, you're talking, an absolutely ancient, early century Italian classic. So you're a tourist and a race fan all in one weekend. But I think the other thing that springs to mind about Imola is those classic corners. Everywhere you go, I mean, here's a good example where they have where they've made the chicane for Senna. You'll see the tributes to him on the outside where he hit the wall just before the river. But on the inside, there is a statue of Senna, which again receives thousands and thousands of tributes year on year. And it's in a very quiet park on the inside of Tamburello. So every time the drivers go down to start a new lap, they will pass the memorial, the statue to the great Ayrton Senna. And these are the sorts of things that you won't see necessarily on TV during the race, but it certainly means so much to every driver out there, from Mick Schumacher to Verstappen to anybody, certainly Lewis Hamilton, when Senna was his hero. So this is something to keep in mind. And given that Ferrari are leading the championship and Charles Leclerc represents that famous prancing horse, this, without a doubt, is one of the most emotional Grand Prix for any Formula One racing driver. And for me, if I were there, I think it would be the same. And so just a few things to think about when you start the race tomorrow, that this is not just another Grand Prix. This is a real classic place, a place where gladiators went and where chariot races were held thousands of years ago, and still today it hosts the greatest gladiators we have in modern times. And Ferrari are right at the front, as they have been since Enzo e Dino Autodromo opened. Good luck, guys. Have a great time. Wish I was there.
Bob, I was watching you when you were listening to Jonathan, and I know that you've seen so many races there, and this really is a pretty special place, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is, and I think that was a wonderful job by Jonathan to sort of encapsulate it all. But there's still so much more that could be said about Imola, which found its place on the Formula One calendar in 1980, a year after Ronnie Peterson was tragically killed at Monza in the Italian Grand Prix, and the Italians decided they couldn't go back to Monza until Monza made some changes. So Imola got one Grand Prix in 1980, and then was missing again until they found a more permanent place on the schedule. I always loved going there for all of the reasons that Jonathan mentioned. That black weekend in 1994, I happened to be calling the race from ESPN's headquarters in Connecticut with Derek Daly. Derek knew instantly the severity of both Ratzenberger and Senna's crashes. Barrichello had his problems, but there was so much more to that weekend. Pedro Lamy crashing into the back of J.J. Leto on the first attempt to start the race. Later on in the race, Michele Alboreto plowed into his pit crew when he couldn't stop, and people were injured just left, right, and center. It was such a black weekend. And yet, I've always argued that that's one of Italy's greatest contributions to world culture is opera, is tragic opera. And I would insist that tragedy, especially in Italy, is a part of the fascination with Formula One, which of course is very, very dangerous. But that's part of Imola. The track is absolutely fabulous. And as Jonathan was speaking, I was wondering, with all the talk about changing up the schedule and going to rich countries around the world that can pay $50 or $60 million for a Grand Prix, Imola can't do that. And yet their track is such a classic. It is such a almost an anachronism, not as much as perhaps Monaco, but certainly with the houses right up next to the track. You never hear about a protest about the track noise. This is Italy. People just live for this sort of thing. It's in their blood. But the track is also severely space limited. They were able to create some extra space by removing the Variante Bassa, the lower chicane just before the pit entrance where Barrichello went into the fence. And now it's a much more flowing and smooth run from Rivazza to the start-finish line. And they've created a bunch of paddock space now, lengthened the pit lane to like 28 seconds in Delta, which I said is the biggest we'll see all year. But the Rio Santerno and the hillsides and the private property owned inside and outside the racetrack just about make it impossible for them to do any significant capital-intensive changes to this track. And frankly, I think it would be a tragedy, another tragedy, if they did. So I hope we can continue to find places on the schedule for races like Imola, because this track is just, one of a kind in so many ways.
Well, you're exactly right. Both of you have captured all of that. And one of the things that I always respect, have reverence for, is when I see the drivers arrive at this track, and many of them march out to Ayrton Senna's statue and will leave some memento or flowers in his lap. The statue is a really cool statue. It's Ayrton sitting on a giant block, and it's got him sitting on it, and then it's got another of him with his kind of leaning against it on a different side. A few different images on it, but a lot of times the one in the lap where he's sitting on top of it gets mementos left there by drivers and fans alike. And so
go find it on the internet. It really is a beautiful statue and a fitting tribute to a great driver.
All right, gentlemen, well, let's get our last break in, and we're going to give you an update on the weather, and then we'll be just a few minutes from the Grand Prix. You listen to Speed City live from Austin, Texas, back after these messages.